Wonderful. Great. So once again, welcome everybody. It's a pleasure having you all here today with us. My name is Elena. I'll be your host today. We are going to discuss the topic of business model innovation and the adoption of the business model post-COVID-19. In case of questions today or any technical issues, feel free to message me in the chat, raise a hand, and I'll be there to assist you. As I said, I'm thrilled to have this discussion today with our two experts, Professor Oliver Gassman and Georg von der Ropp, and to discuss this highly relevant and interesting topic with you today. Let me introduce you, Oliver and Georg, today. So Oliver is the director of the Institute of Technology Management at the University of St. Gallen, and he's a renowned expert and thought leader on the topic of business model innovation. Georg is our CEO at the BMI Lab, a spin-off of the University of St. Gallen, focusing on designing and implementing innovative business models and building innovation capabilities with companies across the world and across the board. So welcome to you two. Thanks for being with us today. Before we start, I just wanted to clarify some organizational bits. So the webinar is being recorded, so you can access it on our YouTube channel shortly after, at your own convenience. Rewatch it and you know, maybe pause a few times if you have, you know, some thoughts and questions that you may want to get in touch with us. As I said, at your own convenience, feel free to share with your network, with friends and fellow innovators. The slides will also be available to you shortly after. And last but not least, please do use the chat function. We encourage you to post questions, interact with us and others, and enjoy the time with us. We're thrilled, and I would say, Oliver, the stage is yours.
Yes, thanks very much, Jelena, for the introduction. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I think we all have seen the pictures. I introduced them again, and maybe we are already a bit tired of looking at these pictures, and I wondered myself, what will my son say like 15 years later about that period, because that sometimes, you know, the little bit of distance helps us a little bit to clarify and maybe also put in relation to what we have seen right now, beside the human tragedy, which is which has been discussed a lot in the media. I would focus a bit on the economic downside of the post-COVID crisis. I would say this is the deepest crisis which has happened since the deepest crisis, at least since 1970. And no matter how fast we will get recovered and how good the stock market is at the moment, overall, the government debts are that dangerous. So we actually, by 4 times, actually, we increased the public debt in the last 10 years. And this is actually something what we need maybe a next generation to work on that. So I think there's a long-term effect on that. And besides the actual situation, let's take now the positive side, and let's look what would happen if everything is actually getting back to normal. Now, everything back to normal, we could look at China, and China actually started as usual in February, beside actually a small drawback. Actually, overall, we can see the streets are rather empty, but the factories are busy again. But what does it mean? And the economists actually mentioned it very nicely as the 90% economy. What would happen if 90% would work? And this is maybe a situation where we have to get used. Actually, also at the moment in Europe, Switzerland has opened up, Germany has opened up, Austria. There's also a discussion of opening up the borders again. I expect actually latest next month, we will also see an opening of the borders. The business as usual in China, where, as I said, they opened up already in February, we expect actually consumer spendings of less than 40%, hotel nights minus 35%, an increase of bankruptcies ×3. And it is always quite helpful to remind ourselves that 90% means actually we from a shutdown, we increase economy back to 90%, but a 90% economy in the US would mean a minus 10% decrease of the GDP. That would be the largest, deepest recession since the Second World War. So we have to get used a little bit in terms of yes, it's everything is actually taking off again, and I think that's a very good message. But even if we're working only at 90%, there will be a big drawback on the consumption. In fact, actually also they call the Zoom communication, the collaboration mode we're in right now, is actually a little bit reduced to the minimum. Reduction to the minimum means actually that we have no unnecessary Slack time and Slack organization. Extreme reduction of informal, accidental communication. But we have to know innovation is actually a result out of the informal communication. So overall, I could summarize the 90% economy might be still a deep crisis for ourselves. I think we need to check actually how can we react. And with my colleagues from BGW, we distinguished a bit in terms of who might we think are the winners and who might we think are the losers of the whole COVID crisis. Every crisis and every war has always also some winners. And what is in terms of the short term and what in terms of the long term. Now, I think the short-term losers are the restaurants, and I think they are short-term. So after everything is reset and we are reopening everything again, we will see also kind of a normal situation again. However, you know, we won't catch up with all the missed turnover what has been in the past. I think one of the extreme short-term winners has been the toilet paper industry. However, I think we will not consume more than we used to do so. So it's really psychologically interesting, but still insignificant winner of the overall COVID crisis. But I think what we need to take care more is actually the retail industry, because the retail industry is a trend will have been accelerated, which has been always ongoing. That's the trend of the digitalization. And I think a lot of the stores, on-site stores will be reduced, and a few of those product categories which have been reduced by online shopping won't come back again. And obviously, the long-term winner we are operating right now, that is all the virtual collaboration modes, such like Zoom, but also WebEx, MS Teams, they all got a big increase. And I think the astonishing point is exactly 10 years before we did a study on home office, only 1 day home office per week, if that would be possible. And my very courageable assumption was due to our studies that every out of the Swiss employees, 50% of the Swiss employees are knowledge workers, and they could afford to be at least 1 day per week working at home, which could result to a reduction of 60,000 million CO2 ton reduction. So it's really, we looked actually at the green effect and also the productivity increase in terms of less lost time for traveling up to now. At that time, it seems to be extremely critical. Now we have been enforced to work at home office. Obviously, a lot of us are longing back to working actually and to physical meet the people. But I think the post-COVID time will also be in the office work no longer the same as it used to be before. I think for us as a company, we need to look at two things. First is actually how to survive today. And for a lot of industries, this is very, very crucial. And I think in Switzerland, we have a perfect mode with Kurzarbeit, and Germany also has similar modes. In the US, we see dramatical consequences if we don't have these political modes. But then we have at the same time also think, where lies our future? Where is actually the sustainable competitive advantage that we could get in the future? And I think especially in the long term, we also have to rethink and remind ourselves that the crisis is always a chance, because there will be always the less competitive companies will be eliminated out of the market. That means actually it is an opportunity to increase market share and actually to regain with a stronger position actually after the crisis. So there's always a positive side of it, and I would like to emphasize a bit on the positive side. Now, first I check a bit on the what are the how do we survive in the short term, and then later on the future long-term orientation. So future, we see actually a lot of frugal innovation, frugal and agile innovation. We can see these examples with textile companies which produce at the moment masks or machinery for supporting breathing. That I think has been one of the biggest opportunities. This is a picture of a central Swiss company which just moved from a textile industry back. I think also a few of the maybe more exotic examples, even an online degustation of winemakers makes sense. So if you sell actually a kind of wine and then you agree on Facebook on a certain time where you would meet virtually and drink together and discuss together actually about the wine. So these opportunities exist. And even more exotic, the rent-a-dog business of Madrid. If you're not allowed to be outside without the dog, and even with the dog, you are only allowed to be 500 meters within your circle where you live. That is actually an opportunity for a business. Overall, I would say this kind of frugal and agile innovation, a phenomenon that we have been doing a lot of research in the past, because that is the kind of innovation what you need in emerging markets, what you can learn a lot from emerging markets and not from our bit of over engineering culture here in Switzerland and in Germany and in Central Europe. This frugal and agile innovation is very much characterized by being pragmatic, being as lean as possible, be cost effective, try to do a fast solution, try to be creative, thinking in terms of what is the next sprint, how can I develop the next prototype and check immediately out whether the customer would react or would not react. We have a lot of also systematic methods for that, like A/B testing, whether you show maybe the homepage of the winemaker, maybe A with a 1, like maybe the product in the center, B like more the lifestyle, the feeling in the center, and you check a bit, you know, via which website actually more customers are coming and joining. So this A/B testing, like example of a very effective experiment. Now, the interesting thing is actually not the short-term orientation. However, short-term orientation leads to cash is king. And at the moment, we need a lot of like this frugal innovation in order just to survive. And I saw a lot of differences between companies which got stocked, like, you know, got frozen by and didn't move at all, and those which became very active and just used the opportunity and looked forward. Now, I think at the moment, this is the moment right now to think also in terms of what would be in the post-COVID world, and what lies in our future. And if you think in terms of a few trends, what is at the moment, what stays, and what will be. I think what we can certainly emphasize is digitalization is something which has been increased the last 20 years, the last 5 years with a lot of emphasis. And because it's about the tipping point. In any exponential function, you will come up to a tipping point where one industry after the other will be catched by digitalization. And at the moment, this is anyway there. And the COVID crisis just dramatically accelerated the digitalization in a lot of different trends. At the same time, we also realized that our supply chain architecture is too often too fragile, and I expect that some kind of a relocalization will happen. We will not produce anything locally everywhere again. We can't afford to do so because the specialization effects and the economies of scale are too strong to do so. But certainly we will not depend in all industries only on one manufacturing, on one supplier. So I think that will be open up. And what we also expect is a like of a on-off mix. It will be digital, but at the same time hybrid and physical again. Things what we observed at the beginning, this virtual esports, big rise of esports as a substitute for the real sport. A virtual run, even marathons you can run, and at the end you actually even get your prize by doing so. The e-commerce is certainly something which dramatically increased, and this has been already a trend. Amazon in Europe is less than 50% at the moment, the share they have on e-commerce. The overall increase has been done, and it's there to stay. So for those product categories where the consumer perceived actually and got the experience of online shopping, very often they don't come back. There are product categories where you would like to go back, but often there is a tendency. I think there is also something like 3D printing, where we did like 5 years ago, a lot of business model exploration in what could be on additive manufacturing modes. And I think this kind of bringing the value creation and value capturing to the consumer side or to the customer side, this is a trend which will ongoing, because we ship only data and not the product itself. And the kind of how we collaborate in future together, this is also a trend which is here to stay. So if I see those trends overall, we could summarize a bit. Digitalization is in all areas. Yes, we will see a kind of a reflected localization and regionalization. It will be not that everything will be done everywhere again, so it's not a call for building up walls along borders, but to check a bit in terms of how fragile your supply chain architecture is, because this time it has been the virus. It could be actually, it was a black swan nobody expected, but it could be also another disruption, and we might reflect a little bit more, but also we will reflect on the on-off mix. Ladies and gentlemen, from my side, I can only say the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And by that, I would like also to hand over to Georg from the BMI Lab. And Georg will come up with a few very specific steps, what we recommend to check actually on the long-term strategy, what you could do. And I hand right now over, and Georg, you take over with your slides.
Thank you very much, Oliver, and a warm welcome also from my side. Yeah, Oliver just explained what Corona and COVID currently means, and also had some ideas how to create an environment where you can survive short term. And he also mentioned a few trends we will see for the future. What is the difficulty to handle this future? It's mainly there is a big uncertainty in many areas. Some trends are emerging, but some trends we do not already have an idea how they will look like. Nobody knows how long we will wear the masks and need to be careful with each personal contact. And this will have a lot of influence on many industries and many companies. So we, together with some customers, we worked and discussed on an approach how to deal with this uncertainty. And the main idea behind it is to make yourself familiar with several options for what the future might look like. And then to analyze what this would mean for your business model, and also what this would mean in means of creating and identifying new business opportunities. The 7 steps you can see here. I will go a little bit deeper on it, and then I'm really looking forward to get some questions and some discussion at the end of this webinar. First step, you need to document your main business model. Most of you might know this magic triangle. It always starts with the customer. Who are your customers and what are the main customer needs? What do you offer to your customer? What are the products? What are the services? What value do you create for the customer? Third dimension, how is this value generated? That means what are the main tasks you are doing on your own? What are your key partners you are relying on? What technologies are you using? And last but not least, how is the value, how can you capture the value for your own company? Why does this business model generate profit? That means what are the revenue streams? What are the cost drivers? And how does the profit engine look like? Now you might think, you know in much more detail how your business look like, but that's not the point. You need this, what we call 10,000-foot view on your business to get a holistic view, to understand and to discuss which areas of your business model might be harmed, which areas of your business model might be strengthened by the different scenarios. Second thing, you have to update or to develop your business ecosystem. That means you have mainly to focus on change drivers which are impacted by the pandemic. That could mean, as Oliver mentioned, that some of the existing trends like digitization are reinforced. Some counter trends could emerge. Maybe it's a part of the tourism where every flight was cheaper and cheaper, where the crusades are growing like hell. Some of the trends are foreseeable. Oliver mentioned some of them, but in many areas, for many industries, and also for some of the markets, it's currently very hard to foresee how the world will look like in a few years from now. If you have identified the main change drivers around your business, then you have to select the most important one, because these are the influencing factors you need to create and develop scenarios. As I mentioned before, scenarios will help you to familiarize yourself with options for what the future might look like. You need to make clear what time horizon you are thinking about. It could be 1 year, could be 2 or 3 years. We would not recommend to take a time horizon more than 5 years, because then you are in a very, very strong uncertainty. Then take and use the influencing factors you have identified with your ecosystem map, and build assumptions. How will these influencing factors develop within the selected time horizon? And then you can group these assumptions into scenarios. Some examples could be the enforcement or the postponement of the global Green New Deal. And this will influence a lot of industries, from mobility to energy to farming and also hospitality. And on the other hand side, you need to identify indicators which will help you in the future to find out which of the scenarios really occur. Then, if you have selected the most important scenarios, and you should make sure that they are not too similar, go to the extreme, think about some sort of worst case or best case scenarios, just to be prepared. Then you can work with the scenarios and analyze what this would mean to each of the dimensions of your business model. And we have developed a business model evaluation matrix, which helps you to go step by step to each dimension and to rethink, for example, which of your customer segments will gain or lose in importance. How will the scenario affect the key partners you need in your supply chain, and all this stuff. And if you have analyzed your business models, you will find out, is a business model at all viable in this scenario, and or might it need adapted in some areas, or can you continue with the business model as you had it before. On the other hand side, the scenarios and the ecosystem map also will help you to identify new business opportunities, focus on changing or new customer needs, where you can use your skills, your resources to create new offerings, to build new business models around it. Together with the analysis of the current business models and the opportunities for new business models, you should think about a vision for your company in a post-COVID-19 world. And that means you have to build on your purpose and mission statement and then project your time horizon into the future. You have to dream big and focus on success to describe in present tense what you will have achieved at this time. And this vision will help you to communicate, not only to address the heads, but also the hearts, to communicate with your team, with your partners, with your customers, with all the stakeholders around you. And don't underestimate how important it is to communicate and also to think out and share your visions, how the future might look like, because this will help to steer the society and your partners in a positive direction. Last not least, you should create a kind of roadmap for further procedure. That means you have to define who will be responsible for which areas where action is needed. You also have to decide how you want to track and monitor the indicators which help you to find out which of the scenarios really will occur. And then you have to initiate projects which help you to adapt or to develop new business models, or to repair some of your existing business models. So just let me summarize. The basic idea behind this approach is to go step by step, starting with your current business model, making options to become familiar with how the future might look like, analyze what this means for your current business, and also identify new opportunities to come up with a vision and a roadmap for the future. So, but now I will hand back to Oliver, and he will explain you how the methodology will look like to adapt or to create new business models.
Yes, thanks, Georg. Well, we used here the business model navigator, and I used right now this this webinar to show the business model navigator also a bit in the new format, as we will rework it in the second edition, which will appear hopefully if the publisher goes with us in autumn. October we expect actually in the second edition. And we have 4 steps. First is the analysis of the ecosystem. That second, you generate new ideas. I mean, if you are on the new business model, and then building consistency and test optimize. So first, sorry, please go back to first step number 1, the analysis of the ecosystem. Here it's very important. And that is what I highly recommend right now also in that situation. Who are actually the actors which are active in your field, which is first actually today's competitors, but then even more important, what are the new entrants? And we have to check a bit about the new entrants, mostly coming from the digital world, but that can be very industry specific. And then secondly, what are the change drivers? The change driver for your ecosystem could be digitalization, but could be a regionalization. I checked already a little bit in the chats, in the chat forum while Georg was speaking, and here I had, for example, one question from Russia, from Vladimir, is are there any sanctions already of Europe, or will we release it? I don't know, but certainly if you are active in Russia, this is one of the change drivers. So it does not have to be always digitalization. It can be a consumer trend, it can be a regulation, it can be a market change or a technological disruption. Then second phase, generation of new ideas. Generation of new ideas, Jelena, could you jump? I am out a bit of my, the second phase, thank you. There you actually, we really work with the business model patterns. Those patterns, what we have invented, we came out with 55 patterns. Up to now, we come in the second edition with 60 patterns. We actually just try to use actually the existing business model patterns actually for creating new business models. Then the third step is the building consistency. Here we first check, are the 4 questions: who is the customer? What is the value proposition we are offering to him or her? How is this value proposition implemented, the supply chain architecture, and why is it profitable, the revenue model? Is that inconsistent? The 4 questions we actually ask them, and that's very important that we not only look from a marketing perspective, not only look from a supply chain perspective, not only look from a financial perspective, but really holistically checking actually, are they 4 questions, are they consistent? And then second, the external consistency. External consistency is actually the check back to the change drivers. And after having all that, we come to the 4th phase, the testing and optimization. We called it previously under the implementation. Now in the second edition, we worked actually much more on the test strategies, because it's most important in a business model, not to talk about the business case in all the Excel sheets in terms of the turnover development and cost development of the next 10 years, because that all is typically very highly uncertain and is actually only based on assumptions. Much more important is, when we have identified the new business model, to identify the most critical underlying assumptions. So what is most critical assumption that our business model works? That can be a change in consumer behavior. That can be a change in terms of our partners. Do they accept in our new business model to partner? That can be a change in the ecosystem development, that the customer journey is actually moving and the point of sale is going to a different direction. That can be also internal capability that is, as we are not visible in terms of implementing that. And it's extremely important to formulate every underlying assumption as a hypothesis. And I often wondered that even in very science-oriented companies like pharmaceutical companies, chemical companies, machinery industry companies, where you have a lot of mechanical engineers, or software companies where you have a lot of software programmers, where you all learned actually the methods of an experiment, the systematic formulation of actually a hypothesis, and a quick, clear check in terms of what is a quick check in terms of what experiment do I have to set up, what a pilot study do I have to set up to actually test, is this underlying assumption real? And if I just take the example of Google, the Google Moonshot projects, the most critical what they try in their initiatives is actually trying to kill their project. And how can you kill it? It's if you first formulate the most critical underlying assumptions and trying to check, is that really possible or not? Is that a feasible assumption or not? And if it's not feasible, then we need to change, and then means also change back the business model. So these 4 steps is actually the business model navigator. This is the framework which what we have developed. For a few might be just a repetition. It's a bit in kind of a new framework, and we put more emphasis actually on the testing. That is also the experience what we got with our BMI lab, where we especially focused a lot on really on going into business model projects and also implementing those. Yes, next one. If I summarize, that is my absolute favorite picture. This picture of the mouse is actually a picture what I got from the founder of a startup company called Logitech. It's from Daniel Borrell, who founded the Logitech company. And he had, if you remember, the mouse was their first business, and said, business model, it's very seductive, it's very attractive, like a really good piece of obviously Swiss cheese, and it smells really seductive, but at the same time it's also quite dangerous. The probability of success in business model innovation is quite lower than product innovation. However, if you have enough cheese around, then maybe all eat all the other and don't touch your business model, just exploit it. However, if the cheese is getting a bit more scarce, you might have to get to the bit more difficult and challenging one. And I think in the post-COVID time, for a lot of industries, the cheese is getting a little bit more scarce. The margins are going down, the globalization becomes tougher. The competition is getting tougher also. The consumer behavior is not really encouraging for a lot of industries. And that actually means we need to go for the business model innovation. And I would like to summarize it always with my last statement. If you go for business model innovation, think big, but start small, fail as cheap as possible, and move fast. Certainly, you need to move faster and learn faster than your environment is changing. Then we have a very good probability that we also survive, and survive in a good, maybe stronger mode in a post-COVID world. Thank you. So I hand over back to Jelena, who is trying to moderate us.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Georg and Oliver, for this highly insightful session, for sharing your insights with us and experiences, and also thank you, participants, for who are very active in the chat, keeping me busy. So do not stop. We'll try to go through the most relevant and interesting questions. And in the meantime, do post some more if you have any further notes or clarification needs. I would say let's get into it. Bear with me, I'll be switching a little bit back and forth. So let's start off with, wow, there's quite a few actually. Let's start off with Dominique from Belgium. So the question to Georg would be, how is your 7-step approach in this crisis time of COVID-19 different to what organizations should be doing anyway in terms of innovation?
Very good question. Thanks a lot. First of all, yeah, all the companies should do it regularly, but how many are really doing it? Second thing, Usually in companies, when we are talking about innovation, we see that there is a difference between incremental innovation, focusing on your current business models, and radical innovation to come up with real business model innovation. And now with a post-COVID-19 situation, we see a lot of uncertainty also for your current business. That means that you also have to think on the relevant assumptions and also to identify how can you change and adapt your current business to possible assumptions in the future. That means some of the tools, some of the mindset you usually primarily use for business model innovation is now needed for the current business and for the adaptation of the current business. And this will change a lot of tasks and also rethinking your business and your business model portfolio.
Maybe if you allow me to add a remark, I think, Daniel, that is you're absolutely right. That is actually your core job of innovating. However, having been now in the business model area since 15 years and doing research and also working together with companies, I often realized all the time when you're doing good, you don't have the capacity to think about the next step. And that is always the critical, still the innovator's dilemma. That's the critical problem always, that we always try to improve a little bit instead of reflecting and checking actually the basic foundations of our business model in order to innovate. Now this crisis is the big opportunity to have a reason, because we are under pressure and a lot of innovation. That is also what innovation research tells us happens actually in those kind of crises. Now this is a big opportunity. So I would really frame it very positively, go through these 7 steps, because right now it's the time to do it. It would have been always your job to do so, but often companies that haven't done it. Yes.
Thank you so much. All right, let's get to the next question. Roberto from Venice is asking, so the crisis is leading to a crucial rethinking of how global value chains have been organized. And how will this reshoring phenomena influence small businesses?
Would you like to start?
Yeah, I want to start. I see currently different trends which are focusing on this question. First of all, we experienced that some of the supply chain literally collapsed. And for the future, company leaders will focus more on resilience than on pure efficiency. That means they have to rethink how could different suppliers be part of their ecosystem to become more resilient. Second thing is we will see that the government will start with some initiatives. Currently, they are discussing about pharmaceuticals, where it is not feasible for companies like all the companies in the European Union to be dependent on purely 2 areas in China and India, where most of them are produced. That means they will create some initiatives and also funding for localize or regionalize this. And as a small company, it's not very different. All the smaller companies which are currently working with a global supply chain, and very often with at least a multinational market, are used to deal and to negotiate with partners around the world, and they have to do the same rethinking and to balance between what is on an economic point of view and what is on this resilience point of view necessary.
Let me also add another point. I totally agree. And I would just add another point for a lot of SMEs. This is the opportunity, because a lot of European companies would go right now to second sourcing, dual sourcing, or even multiple sourcing. And this is the opportunity for the local regional SME to also build up a small parts of business and actually create and show that they can deliver with a great quality at similar costs, maybe a small cost plus, but at similar costs. And so I would think that this is this rethinking of global supply chain is actually is a big opportunity that for many SMEs to also enter new markets.
I hope this answers the question, Roberto. I would say let's also address a question that two people have posed. Perhaps, Oliver, you could just repeat the meaning or clarify the sense behind the 22 patterns in the last test phase.
Yes, that is the new thing what will be published. Yet it's not yet published. We didn't have anything yet. However, what we do, yes, maybe send an email to either, I don't know, Jelena or Georg, or visit our homepage, bmilab.com, where we have actually something on the testing. However, the book chapter is not published yet. What we actually do is actually we have very different kind of testing strategies. So there is not the one testing. I mentioned A/B testing. It depends what kind of assumption do you have. Do we need to learn with our pilot study on our business model? What is actually the new business model? How does it look like? Or is it something that we would like to confirm a hypothesis? Well, we know this consumer pattern actually goes in that direction, and we think with this action, we would actually like to confirm. So it depends a bit of what kind of problem do we have, what kind of testing strategy we have. And we selected 22 testing strategies, methods actually to test your business model out of it. And maybe Georg, you have been deeper involved in that.
Yeah, maybe some small amendments. These 22 testing cards are testing strategies or setups for experiments. And you can use it to identify in which area, for example, is it about the customer need or the customer willingness to pay. These are both are highly important assumptions, but the testing strategies for testing this are completely different. And to identify what testing strategies could help you to test and validate the specific assumptions of your business, you can use it similar to the business model innovation pattern cards to run through it and to think what would it mean to, for example, creating a contextual inquiry. What could I learn from it, and how could I measure if the results of this experiment are really a validation of what the assumption and hypothesis would mean. So it's a structured way to make sure that you do the right things at the right time and not are puzzled in finding out what could be means for testing.
Yes, I just see Georg has even the testing table in the background.
Yeah, thanks.
Indeed. Right, let's get to the next question. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit on how this crisis would also impact the public sector in terms of course, combined with business model innovation.
Maybe I'll start here. I think we will, first there's an ideological dimension to that. I try to eliminate the ideological dimension of how much state do we need and how little do we need. But one thing is clear, the state has become already active. Also by also lending all the debts and by supporting, by all the I mean by the large subsidiaries which has been actually announced actually nearly all over the world. So Switzerland, that was the largest thing, what the Swiss government ever did. And in the US, it became also trillions. So the question is actually, how do you react on that? What are the conditions? So you have already a stronger influence in industries like airlines, public transportation, maybe also some parts of the healthcare system, where you have a more active role. I would say, starting from that, I would predict, yes, there's a more active involvement, and I would demand that the state goes more really in terms of public-private partnerships and try to find out to develop business models which are multilateral. We had been looking a lot in smart cities and how smart cities actually succeed. We right now saw that Alphabet or Google did withdraw from Toronto, from the Toronto case, from the largest showcase in the world. But the problem there is actually that the PPP has been not balanced. The public-private partnership has been not balanced, and a strong business model thinking, as we suggested, also for the state, would support such a collaborative mode.
Just another addition from my own experience. During crisis times, during a crisis, the public sector becomes a highly attractive customer segment because they are investing in times where all the other companies are looking for cost cutting and only for some very specific tasks they are doing in outsourcing. So many companies now will check or will realize that the public sector is a highly attractive customer segment, but it's a long journey to become a trusted and reliable partner for this segment. So we will see changes there as well.
Thanks so much, Georg and Oliver. I have a great question from Mattia, corresponding to the example that Oliver was addressing with the winners and losers, short-term, long-term. So I'm just going to read through. Speaking of the sectors that cannot fully exploit the digital aspects, what effects can there be, for example, in the gastronomy industry, with reference to restaurants, and what sort of future are they facing, and how can their business models then operate in this new space?
That's an interesting question. I was asking it to myself too, because what happens right now? Are we going back to normal? Now, obviously, we're going back to the new normal, and I think there is also a challenge for the whole restaurant business to actually eliminate bottlenecks, because what we actually see is actually the social distancing, which is actually not a social distancing but a physical distancing, means actually that we need actually distance, and we need a more seamless supply chain and logistic. And I think a lot of service chains will use or will have the opportunity to improve logistically actually their whole processes by optimizing it, because they have to at the moment. Previously they didn't need to. Now in the US we see a lot of restaurants. We Europeans don't like it too much when you're squeezed a little bit through your dinner. I personally don't like it, but obviously it has some efficiency points. And I think, and I realized also a few restaurants also have started that, even restaurants where they didn't have at all the image of doing so, where you spend actually always a nice evening. And we have to rethink what that means. The question is, are consumers accepting that? Are we as a guest to a restaurant, are we accepting that? And that's the most critical assumption we have to check. And I think here we have to ask new questions because we all get educated. Half year ago, nobody of us would have thought, what we have enforced, even, the home office thinking, home office working. What I demanded 10 years ago, only for 1 day per week, only for knowledge workers, with a kind of a little bit of a flexibility, and it was highly challenged. Now we are immediately in a very strong mode. And maybe also the consumers would follow such a business model innovation also in the restaurant business.
Just also one aspect to add. From my point of view, the gastronomy has two customer values or two kinds of benefits to the customers. First is serving food and drinks. The second thing is offering a place for social interaction. And probably this might split up, as we see a lot of restaurants now offering their meals to go. They also offer staple food with recipes and cooking boxes. So the pure meal could be separated from this social interaction. And I'm really curious to find out what this will create in really new business models as well.
Thanks so much, you two. I would say we have about time for 2 more questions. Most recent question from Lena was, we stated in the webinar description that the pandemic will accelerate already existing trends. It's moving up. Sorry about that. Not necessarily creating new ones. Could you elaborate a little bit further on this?
Yes, thanks. It was just what we mentioned in crisis, and that's really from research, that trends always get accelerated. Obviously, the physical distancing is a kind of a new trend, and there will be new micro trends. But history always shows us that a few trends which anyway happened, such like digitalization, will right now accelerate it if it fits towards the pressure of the crisis. And so I don't expect right now that the post-COVID world is a total different one. But we will put a few emphasis on a few points where trends will radically improve. The collaboration mode, the freelancer, the kind of how we include freelancer, the way how we think in terms of supply chain, the seamless customer journey within ecosystems, which has been anyway happening. The insurance industry will anyway change dramatically. That has happened already. Now, since we have been forced to digitally interact with the company, we got used to do so, and the next step is we asked to do so. So it is actually just trends which are anyway there, mega trends which are anyway there, and they will be accelerated. So I think while anybody in the media is saying we will live in a total new world, I hope we'll become a little bit more green, a little bit more responsive to the climate, to everything, try to re-evaluate our values. But history has shown that after 1 year being normal, everything will be the same, but just the trends has been accelerated, which has been anyway underlying. So while the media are always underlying, everything will be totally different and everybody is forecasting there's nothing as been before, I agree, but not because of something totally new is coming up, but because of trends which are already there implicitly or explicitly are accelerated.
Thanks so much for this. One last question, which I find quite interesting from a bird's eye perspective on the topic of today's webinar. I'll just openly ask it. What do you think differentiates companies that are able to adopt their business models faster than and earlier than others?
First of all, these are the companies who had trained their innovation muscles in the last few years, which started to focus on real customer centricity, which started to explore how to use new technologies. And these companies, and that's not depending on the industry, it's more depending on the leadership and the team, the openness, the ways they are collaborating with other companies, with different partners. These companies will be much faster in adapting and also in using new opportunities to create something really new.
Yes, I would say, just to summarize in a two-sentence, business model innovation is the differentiator for sustainable competitive advantage. And the more we think of it, whether it's radical business model disruption or business model adaptation, the better we create competitive advantage and the better we survive in the future. And also empirical research has shown the more profitable we are. So I think it's worthwhile thinking about that. Thanks for that question.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you, Alexandra. I think we could go on for a few more hours. This is a truly interesting session. Thank you all for the questions. As always, I think it's difficult to address all and to find, you know, really the right depth to answer these in a short time as such. But do please reach out to us. I think if you go to the next slide, perhaps if you want to show it, Georg, get correct. You will find some more information on the resources on our website. You can also read up on our blog for some inspiration and further insights. Do give us a like or a follow on LinkedIn. Get in touch with us. Yeah, and then and let's connect and take this further, right?
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Georg. Thank you, Oliver. It was a true pleasure, and we hope to repeat this perhaps in a better, brighter future.
All right. Thanks very much, Jelena, for great
thanks to all
thanks
of
to
you.
everybody for coming and joining. Take care and stay healthy.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Good evening. Bye-bye.